Those who are in charge, those who are on top of the organization, they seem to be in illusion that rubbing shoulders with famous and rich and powerful and MPs, ministers, is going to bring influence. Now, we know from history that that's not true.
The Trojan Horse Affair is back in the news again, thanks to a podcast from America, which has reignited the debate on the scandal. It took 2 investigative journalists 3 long years to produce some sizzling new material. And as a result, we now know what many suspected for years, that the 2014 Islamic plot hatched by Muslim extremists to push a hardline religious ideology into our schools was a hoax. It was peddled by racists and Islamophobes. The destructive narrative destroyed careers, communities, and schools, and enabled an Islamophobic government to shape its counter-terrorism strategy around Muslims by using the discredited PREVENT scheme as a blunt weapon to oppress and spread fear in the Muslim community. The whole affair still casts a long shadow. Today's In Conversation with Yvonne Ridley sees me talking to a number of concerned parties, including one of the journalists himself. But my first conversation is with Masood Shajara from the Islamic Human Rights Commission. And he has some harsh words for the Muslim community, as well as some sage advice to ensure that there is never a repeat.
The Muslim organizations were really hugely responsible because of their failure to stand up. There seemed to be something, Yvonne, going on with our community, that every time we go through episode of very clearly Islamophobic, institutionalized, systemic, and then, as soon as we make some noises, and then sort of few months later, we push the sort of restart button. And we are not able to connect the dots and to see that this is actually something that is happening day by day, month by month. And our failure to put red lines and actually stand up in protection of not just the Muslim community, which indeed we should do, but I would say even the whole community, because this sort of level of environment of hate, it has a tremendous impact on non-Muslims as well. They become victim to this. And our failure is in a very large, look, let me give you an example. Recently on the case of citizenship, the Sikh Council came up immediately, very clearly, saying anyone who voted, any member of parliament who voted for this racist bill will not be welcome in any of our temples. They can't enter, Why is it that the Muslim community needs failing that?
Does the Muslim community need to be more confident? The trouble is that although it's a minority, it's still quite a large minority within the UK, but it's who truly represents us, because our community...
That's the point. And where do you get influence? There seem to be those who are in charge, those who are on top of the organization. They seem to be in illusion that rubbing shoulders with famous and rich and powerful and MPs, ministers, is going to bring influence. Now, we know from history that that's not true. Look at the Black community, look at other communities. We were told sort of just in the last few months that we should write a letter to all the MPs and thank them. For what? For being systematically racist. We're allowing this sort of legislation to go through day in, day out for politicians of all parties being Islamophobic on a daily basis and, creating and being in charge of this environment. I think we need to be confident to stand up to the bullies. The problem is this, that a lot of people in the leadership of Muslim community, they think they have to work with the bullies. They have to there is a misunderstanding. If we sit down and have a cup of tea, we're going to get somewhere. And unfortunately, that is not working. That is the reason that we are seeing day by day more legislation, more principles, more Islamophobic rhetorics coming out of all political parties and media and we are, we just lonely voices every once in a while. 1 minute we say we condemn Conservative Party for being racist. The next minute we're writing letters to thank them. It seems that we are failing to understand the depth of the problem, the systematic aspect of the problem, and we are failing to connect the dots. We're just taking these incidents one at a time, and we are being short-sighted.
Well, instead of kissing the hand that slaps us, what is the answer?
I think if we organize us, look, Yvonne, I remember, I'm sure you remember, around 10, 15 years ago, when Jack Straw did something regarding hijab and niqab, then all the Muslim organizations, including us, MCB, Cage, Hizb Tahrir, you name it, Jamaat Islami, everybody, MAP, everyone. We all came together and we wrote a letter and stood up. That is the way forward. There are issues that we all have to stand up and unite and create these red lines that to protect our community and to protect not just Muslim community, but protect the liberties of all of us. And I think that is really where we are failing. We are failing to analyze that these are not isolated incidents, and we are failing to find the remedy, which means we coming together and establishing with confidence those red lines and standing for it.
Well, it's the old argument of unity and strength, isn't it? But also, one of the byproducts of this great hoax was the emergence of the Prevent scheme, this discredited, nasty scheme that the government was able to roll out on the back of the Trojan Horse hoax. That really has been damaging, hasn't it? It's turned teachers and doctors and community leaders into spies.
Yeah, look, Yvonne, you know and I know, and the history have shown us that if you allow the bullies to get away with bullying when it's so clearly they should have been challenged and stopped, then they will go much, much further. And I think it's not just Prevent, which, it's been unleashed against our community. Many other things which has been unleashed against our community would not have happened if at any stage the Muslim community stood up, and we had justice on our side, and we could have convinced the society at large the injustices that are taking place. Only if we had confidence enough and we actually talk to each other, we actually come together. We took the issues to become more important than our little positions in little organizations.
Well, this is a watershed moment now. The emergence of this new evidence that's come out in this brilliant podcast. It is a watershed moment. How should the Muslim community react now?
I think we need to ask for resignation. We don't need an investigation. This podcast is evidence enough, and there was even evidence enough before. Only if we sort of followed up all the leads, and as long as I'm concerned, I've listened to the whole lot of the pod. I didn't learn anything new, just one issue. But other than that, we all knew what was going on. And the fact of the matter is we don't need another investigation. What we need, action. Action needs to be taken. Gove and the police officers and the whole establishment, which actually came together so dishonestly to push this hoax on the whole of the community, need to be answerable for their crimes, really.
Well, let's see if we can get justice over this very sad affair. Masood, thank you very much for coming on to my podcast. I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Someone who has monitored and reported on the Trojan Horse Affair is veteran journalist Roshan Saleh. He keeps his finger on the pulse of Muslim affairs in Britain as editor of the Five Pillars news service. This is what he told me.
And the media fell into line, and they just ran with this crazy narrative, which I'm convinced one day will be exposed as the British Muslim community's Dreyfus Affair.
You've got your finger on the pulse of what's happening in the Muslim world, especially in the UK. How did this scandal erupt into the way that it did and ran for so many years without being challenged?
Well, I think what happened is there were effectively a bunch of disgruntled Islamophobes in Birmingham who were unhappy that certain underperforming schools in Muslim areas of Birmingham had been turned around and had become excellent. And at the same time, they were celebrating the Muslim culture and background of the majority of the children. And they were sending anonymous letters to Birmingham Council and then it just kind of coincided at a time when Michael Gove was Education Secretary, a renowned Islamophobe who actually had I think a chapter in his book called Trojan Horse, believe it or not. And I think he just jumped on it, seized it as an opportunity when this anonymous letter was sent to Birmingham Council of a supposed Islamist plot to take over Birmingham schools. And he was like, well, right, I'm going to make something of this. And I think the security services fell into line. Ofsted fell into line, the police fell into line, Birmingham Council fell into line, and the media fell into line. And they just ran with this crazy narrative, which I'm convinced one day will be exposed as the British Muslim community's Dreyfus Affair. People will remember the Dreyfus Affair, a notorious anti-Semitic incident in 19th century France. Mm-hmm. This is what's going on, based on a hoax. This is what's happening with the Muslim community here. So you had this fake letter, which should never have been taken seriously, but turned into this massive national scandal targeting Muslims.
And why has it taken a podcast produced in New York by, the New York Times? Why has it taken an outside media to expose this when the mainstream media in Britain have ignored it?
Yes, well, I think that's very instructive. The fact that it took a foreign company, which has some distance from the UK to do this. It's because British mainstream media journalists were completely complicit in propagating a false narrative, and they didn't ask the right questions. They should have seen through this straight away. It's absolutely ridiculous that a stupid fake hoax letter, which the police actually admitted was fake, and Michael Gove was told was fake as well. They should just have kind of dismissed it out of hand as being something crazy. But, you and me are both journalists, Yvonne. We hunt in packs. The mainstream media hunt in packs. They're not as clever as we think they are. They might kind of package stuff beautifully, and it might look good and, read well, etc. But when you kind of dig beneath the surface, often there's not much there. And I think when ultimately what I think has happened is security services have fed this story to certain prominent journalists at the Sunday Times. They've run with it, and then everyone else has seized upon it. And then it's become like a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's a bit like the narrative that Boris Johnson is toast. Logically, if you think about it, no, he's not toast. He'll hang on. It's also the widely accepted narrative that Russia will invade Ukraine. I don't think they will invade Ukraine. It doesn't make any sense that they'll do that. The cost is too high. But these things, once they're covered by one outlet or covered by another outlet, it becomes like a snowball effect, domino effect, an avalanche. And before you know it, these lies become truth and unassailable truth.
You're painting a really horrific picture here. What can the Muslim community do about it? Because I have spoken to the Islamic Human Rights Commission, and while the finger of blame is clearly pointed in various directions, Masood Shajara said, we are to blame, we as in the Muslim community.
Well, we are generally. Obviously, we're quite divided amongst ourselves and we're not organized enough. I think that is slowly changing, but it's going to take a long time. Quite frankly, in the Muslim community, I think we have lots of different organizations who are first and foremost concerned about themselves and their own profile. And they don't work with each other. I mean, obviously, if you run an organization, your priority is going to be yourself. But there has to be some kind of coordination with other Muslim organizations. That is lacking in the community. That's my experience. I think with the Trojan Horse Affair, I can remember at the time, 2014, 2015, some organizations like the MCB, they came out with a few statements, but the teachers who actually suffered, getting banned for life and losing their jobs, they've all told me that organizations like the MCB didn't do anything for them. The MCB, I'm sure, would deny that, and they did come out with statements saying it was a hoax and etc. But above and beyond that, they didn't seem to do much. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think they did, and nor did anybody else in the Muslim community.
They've come out now and they want an inquiry. I know that there's a petition underway, and if we get 100,000 signatures, which should be easy when you consider there's at least 2 or 3 million of us in the UK, it should get debated in Parliament. But what is your message to Muslims out there? I mean, we're not one community, we're many communities made up of all different sides of Islam. What is your advice to them?
Well, I think we need to seize on this and get some concrete action. I think what Muslims are good at doing is getting angry for, a week and then not following it up. I've seen that so many times where we work ourselves up into a frenzy, and we come up with, protests and petitions, and then after a couple of weeks, it's done. And I think the authorities know that's the case, that ultimately we're full of hot air and it'll blow over. And I think we have to seize on things like the Trojan Horse Affair and things like Prevent and whatever, and really run with it for a long time. And, obviously our problem is that the mainstream are completely ignoring us. I mean, within the Muslim community, everyone knows the Trojan Horse is a farce, but we seem to have very few non-Muslim journalists in the mainstream that are willing to run with what is a completely obvious narrative, and in the fullness of time will be exposed as such. One day there'll be no doubt that this was a hoax letter. Michael Gove was an Islamophobe. He cooked up the whole thing to target it. That will be the narrative. But often what happens in Britain is it doesn't happen till 50 years time. We need it to happen now. So I don't know. I mean, I think if we have any outreach into the mainstream, we should use it as much as possible, so this becomes a mainstream narrative rather than just a Muslim community narrative. But I think ultimately we are very marginalized in this country. That's not going to change in the short term. And I think our priority, I always feel our priority is organizing ourselves first and foremost and becoming a strong community, which then the mainstream will take more seriously, because at the moment they can just pick us off and divide us.
Do you think we could take a lead from the Black communities or the Jewish communities? that really seem on the ball when
We can learn.
this
We
happens.
can learn from it. Sorry, Yvonne. I mean, we can learn from everybody. That doesn't mean we should adopt exactly the same tactics as everybody, because circumstances differ. I think with Five Pillars and myself, I've always been kind of very hot on, you know, we can't compromise our Islamic values in whatever we do. We can't compromise Islamic red lines, whether those be religious red lines or political red lines. But within that framework, there's lots of flexibility to work with others, to adopt tactics that others have found successful. So that would be my only kind of, my own personal red line, that in trying to influence the wider community, we don't lose our Islam. Otherwise, let's do whatever we can.
Right, well, Roshan, thank you for joining me today on what is, I think, going to be a big talking point for the next few weeks to come. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Don.
Faisal Khan was a school governor in Bradford when the toxic Trojan Horse letter surfaced in Birmingham. The event had far-reaching repercussions and went on to destroy careers, reputations, and people's lives. He had a ringside seat.
And that's like a running theme. I think anybody that's been involved with the Trojan Horse affair will find that either the allegations are anonymous, evidence is ignored blatantly, or it's deliberately misconstrued.
Faisal Khan, you're one of the people who was affected by the fallout of the Trojan Horse, although you're not from Birmingham, you're from Bradford, where you did work as a school governor, which is a voluntary role, shows community spirit more than anything else. But what sort of impact did the Trojan Horse hoax have on you, your community, and the wider Muslim community?
So I mean, I'd got involved in governorship when my daughter was attending the school, and I thought, well, you know, I'd gone through that schooling system where I'd got my GCSEs, A levels, and got a degree, and I thought, you know, I want to give something back and be involved with the school my daughter goes to. And I must have spent 5, 6, 7 years there. And over that time, I got to learn quite a lot about what I thought where I thought the school was at and where it actually was at. And so when the whole Trojan Horse affair sort of kicked off, you know, everyone was watching it from afar, but I could see the build-up, because even though the letter's widely acknowledged as a fake, the alleged recipient of the letter was somebody from Bradford. And given my involvement with education and trying to raise standards, Andrew Gilligan eventually sort of outed me as he inferred. They never say things exactly. It's always an anonymous voice, and because if it's not anonymous, you can challenge it. Yeah. And so the two schools that I was at, I was chair of governors at one of those schools, and both those governing bodies were removed, and I believe in order to remove myself. Even the Bradford Council never admitted and said that there's no Trojan Horse in Bradford, but they did exactly the same thing. They put the measures in place in order to remove people, and certainly my younger brothers, one particular, you know, the minute they got us out of the school. In fact, I remember I went to pick the GCSE results for my daughter, and the minute I stepped out of the school, an email went to my younger brother to say that he was now suspended based on his private Facebook profile. Well, actually, they didn't exactly tell him what he was suspended for, but eventually it said it's because of his posts. And I remember asking my younger brother and saying, well, you know, ask him for the social media policy. And when he did that, they said, oh, there is none. So they suspended him on something that didn't exist. And that's like a running theme. I think anybody that's been involved with the Trojan Horse affair will find that either the allegations are anonymous, evidence is ignored blatantly, or it's deliberately misconstrued. And these are by organisations that you would expect to uphold the law and follow proper procedures, whether it's Ofsted, DfE, the local authority. So the impact for my brother was eventually he lost his job of 18 years. And then not having that justice, not having the media really pick up on the story, but just reinforcing the narrative. And it was a frenzy, really.
Yeah.
It was a frenzy around.
Well, I was going to
that.
ask you about the British media, because all these years on, and it's the New York Times through its podcast that has really exposed the whole hoax. How did you feel when you were listening to that podcast?
I loved it because all we've asked for is for someone just to get to the truth. Nothing more, nothing less than that. And all we've had is walls put up, people acting dishonestly. And it's difficult for us as governors and teachers where we say, look, we've been treated unfairly, but to have it spelled out by a foreign organisation in a foreign country, it's quite an indictment of the lack of journalistic integrity within the UK, where they were chasing a particular framed narrative as opposed to the truth. I mean, I remember
this framed narrative was something that Michael Gove, the government minister, seemed to shape counter-terrorism policy on. The Trojan Horse Affair became such an important sort of foundation to the whole counter-terrorism narrative, even though this podcast showed that Michael Gove knew that it was a hoax.
Yeah, and that's the wider impact. You say, what's the impact? The impact is in the wider community. I mean, in terms of what we were trying to do as governors in the school, we would try to raise the attainment. I mean, Bradford, their average GCSE results were at the bottom of the league table, near the bottom of the league table. And, the excuses that used to get, it was often framed that, because of the socio-economic factors, you can't get more out of these students. And Tyre Allen proved, he took a school of people listened to the podcast, was it 3-4% to 75%, and the national average at the time was about 60%. So what he did was absolutely phenomenal. So, we said, look, in Bradford, it's the same parents, the same kids, the same background, the same socioeconomic factors. If they can do it, we can do it. And school hours at Calton Bolling, the results had been stagnant for about 10 years at 30%. And I remember I became the chair of governors and we had a new head teacher. And within 3 years, we'd got to around 50%. So we were on that trajectory to improve the school. So if you think about the impact, when it's 30%, that's 70% who are not going to further education and employment. So there's no pathway. The pathway is onto the streets. And so we will try to drive that up, so the impact is not just in terms of educational attainment, but it's where do these young people end up? So there's a much wider impact. And Barker End, which is, the area served by this school, is one of the most deprived areas in the whole of the UK. So
what would you like to see happen now as a result of this podcast by the New York Times?
I mean, the podcast barely scratches the surface of what went on.
But they don't understand that. A lot more than any of the British papers.
But they've done a fantastic job. I was on the edge of my seat on the last episode, listening to Ahmed Da Costa, I won't say too much. I want people to listen to the podcast. I mean, what they've done is fantastic. It's beautifully made. It takes you through it. Evidentially, it takes you through what happened. It contextualizes the information for you. I think for us as governors, teachers that have been directly affected, We just want the truth to come out. So whether that's through an independent public inquiry or investigations by the local authorities, or for journalists and local authorities to listen to the podcast and reevaluate the executive decisions that they made and contributed to this particular saga, because the impact has, obviously for myself and my immediate family has been quite negative, but for the schools and for those children that went to those schools, those life opportunities, have been damaged. And then the wider impact, the whole securitization of Prevent, where teachers and health professionals almost having to spy on their kids. This is not healthy democracy. We talk about a healthy democracy. The media need to take an introspective look as well. One of the pillars of democracy is a free press, but when it self-censors itself, that puts us in a really dangerous place. So the impact is not just for the Muslim community, though that is a particular focus, the whole Islamophobia, a lot of times directed from this government, is my sort of assertion. All that needs to be looked at. So the difficulty is getting legal representation. Sorry.
There's a petition now that, if there's enough signatures, the government will have to debate it in the House of Commons.
Yeah, I've seen that. I've not even had a chance to sign it myself yet, and I will be doing. I'll be sending those out to my contacts, and I encourage everybody to sign that, because the other reason I got involved in education is when people are frustrated about issues that are going around the world, it's how do you articulate that in a way that's effective, and I became a counsellor as well. When I was a governor, I became a counsellor, and the whole idea was that we've got these democratic structures that you can participate and be part of, and it put me in a dark place when I realised, when the crunch came, the rug couldn't be taken from underneath you. I was democratically elected as a governor, and I was undemocratically removed. So it makes it becomes a bit of a sham, really.
Well, thank you so much for spending your time explaining how this impacted on you, on the wider community, on your family. And, let's hope that justice is just around the corner for people like you, Faisal, and many others as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
One of the journalists involved in the podcast, which took us step by step through the scandal, is Hamza Saeed. He joined forces with a renowned US podcaster to uncover the identity of the author behind the toxic Trojan Horse letter back in 2014. Today, he's in conversation with me about the investigation and its impact.
A sad story. This is a dark and sad story. And I personally did not want to tell a story in which by the end of it, you feel defeated. I went to medical school. I was training to become a doctor. I had some latent thought about trying to be a writer at some point, and decided to pursue that after graduation for a bit. Wasn't very specific about what I was aiming for, but the idea was maybe I'd write for television, and that's kind of where my focus was for a while. And in the process, I was getting older and feeling a bit guilty for having trained up as a doctor and now spending most of my time just writing kind of for entertainment, and wanted to find a way to just make myself feel less guilty. And journalism kind of started developing as a thought because of that. I thought, here's a way where I can still kind of explore writing, which is what I was interested in doing, but something that could also help me possibly give back and feel less guilty about getting a medical degree and not doing much with it.
You went into one of the most thankless branches of journalism, which is investigative work, which I think, as you have discovered after 3 years of investigating the Trojan Horse Affair, would be 90% of waiting and 10% of action.
Well, luckily that decision came from pure naivety. So that helped. But also there was a course which I must give a shout out to him, Professor Richard Danbury, started, which Channel 4 was sponsoring in a university quite nearby where I lived in Birmingham. And it was the premise of that course that really fascinated me. Like, Richard Denbury was someone who had a long history in journalism in Britain, but was specifically starting an investigative journalism course, recognizing a need for it in Britain. And that's kind of where I kind of, having discovered the course, stumbled across it and read the foundations of what it was supposed to be about. I thought that sounds right to me. You know, I wasn't interested in daily reporting. I was interested in discovering evidence and facts and details. And that's something which I thought investigative journalism set you up for better than just standard kind of on the beat reporting.
Well, I, like many others, you know, listened to the podcast, was totally gripped by it. But you tackled a very complex subject, and you did it with almost a forensic approach, as one would expect a medical expert to tackle a disease or a tumor or something, you know, invasive in a human body. Could you draw those parallels?
I mean, it's funny you mentioned that, because there was an element of bringing that kind of process to this investigation, because it's such a broad, sweeping topic, the Trojan Horse and what happened in 2014, and there's so much confusion around it. And my issue from the very beginning was that nobody was looking at the inception. No one was looking at the kind of the original pain, which was the Trojan Horse letter. And, you know, in much the same way as if you go into a hospital with kind of all these confounding symptoms, and it's a bit of a confused picture, to start with the original source. Where did the pain begin? And build your picture up from there. And for me, that was a Trojan Horse letter. So let's go back to this triggering document, try to find out as much as we can about that. And that should help us in terms of following this thread through with each level of power, each authority that then responded to it. But let's just take it back to the beginning. So I don't think it was like a conscious decision to do that, but I think my mind had just been trained in a certain kind of way, 5 years of medical school, that it just happened to kind of translate to journalism as well.
Yeah. Now then, your sort of co-investigator, Brian
Reed.
How did the pair of you get together? Did he choose you, or did you choose him? Or?
I like to think none of us chose each other. It just so happened that we came together at a perfect moment. He was passing through Birmingham, and I was literally about to start my journalism course the day after. And he had this talk about S-Town, the previous story that he did, which is a huge success. And I love the way he did stories, and I was a huge admirer of the fact that they did investigative journalism. And he was passing through. I decided, because I wasn't getting much luck engaging with people on the topic of the Trojan Horse in England, I thought, well, here's an American passing through. It might be an opportune moment to pick his mind, and hopefully he won't be carrying in all the history and all the headlines that the Trojan Horse created in Britain, and kind of listen to the pitch I'm making from a fresh perspective. So I kind of bundled my way backstage after his talk and rattled through this quick 5-minute pitch of what the story was, with the intention that he would just point me towards who I should speak to first. That's basically the question I was building towards. Who should I speak to first? I didn't want to mess it up. There was a lot of characters, a lot of parts to the story, and I didn't want to go around and kind of, you know, mess up the whole investigation through my own inexperience. So that's kind of what I was building up towards, was this question of who should I speak to first. But before I got there, he'd already jumped in and said, it's a really good story, and I might want to look into this with you. And then 2 weeks later, I got a phone call from New York, and we were away.
The pair of you seemed to gel really well together. It was, you know, a partnership made in heaven.
I mean, legitimately, I could not have imagined landing next to a better person than Brian, not just because of just his incredible mind and the way he kind of helped me structure this investigation from the very beginning, his experience of knowing how to take this complicated story and break it down into its parts so we can kind of do it step by step. But just watching him, being alongside him, watching him build interviews, knowing like what our intentions were as going into each room, and then the evidence that we're gathering. He has an incredible way of like sorting through information and categorizing it in a way that was just masterful. So just, yeah, like being alongside him and just recognizing how brilliant he was, and feeling the privilege of having him interested in the story, having him leave his home in New York to come join me in Birmingham. I think we were just very generous with each other because of that, you know.
Do you think that you'll be working together again?
I don't know. I hope so. I don't know in what capacity or what we'll be doing, but you know, he's one of my best friends now, and I'm sure we'll be away again on another adventure some point soon.
So what has been your sort of ultimate conclusion from all of this? Are you going to return to medicine, or are you going to focus more on journalism, or try and balance between the two?
I am going to continue being a storyteller. I know that much. Whether that remains in journalism or not, I'm not sure. I feel like this series was an intention to cause a debate whether journalism can accommodate this kind of way of reporting. I was scared of some of the decisions I was making while I was reporting, but it just felt right to the truth that I was hoping to get. And I don't know, like, I feel like if journalism thinks this is what journalism should sound like, then I could see a way forward for me in this career.
Well,
if journalism has
certainly had a huge impact, and it's continuing to make waves today. There's now an online petition from people who are hoping to get enough signatures that will force the British government to hold a debate, at the very least, into the Trojan Horse inquiry. The Muslim Council of Britain has said that it wants an inquiry. There are a few people whose lives were blown apart by this whole affair who are now seeking legal redress. Did you have any idea that you would get this sort of reaction from the public?
Not really, because I've never put a story out before, so I didn't know what the capacity of a story was. There was a hope, and obviously there was an intention of making this part of the narrative again in Britain, having people discuss it, having people go back to it and figure out what went wrong in 2014. But the reaction has been overwhelming. It's been surprising to a certain extent, predictable in some sense, the way the British media so far have handled the story, but the people and their response has been really heartening.
Yeah, I mean, where do you think it's all going to end now?
I don't know. I feel like I'm waiting to see what happens myself. You know, I do think this is an opportunity. I do think this is a moment that people can get behind, and if people are motivated enough, could lead to something.
Well, it has been described as a watershed moment for the Muslim community, and they either take more of the same or they use this moment to make a stand and start to make demands, as in other communities do. Like,
well, I mean, what I will say, just to that, what I will say is that this is a sad story. This is a dark and sad story, and I personally did not want to tell a story in which by the end of it you feel defeated, even though it has that kind of quality to it because of what happened. I did not want to put out a story where Muslims heard it and internalized their lack of power in some sense. I wanted them to hear the story and be motivated and to have a sense of courage to go and do something about it. So if that's the effect it's having, that was 3-4 years of intention built into that, to make sure it wasn't just another sad story about Muslims who have been, acted against. I wanted them to hear the story and feel a sense of motivation to do something about it and make sure something like this doesn't happen to them again.
Yeah, well, this is what, I think that people are hoping for. Sorry, that scratching in the background is my little dog trying to get in.
Co-presenting, get him involved.
Well, at least it shows this isn't rehearsed. But one of the other questions that I wanted to ask you was, how has your family reacted to this? Do they realize just how seismic your investigation has been? You know, what a game changer it's become.
Bits and pieces, I think. I have 3 brothers, and my parents live in Abu Dhabi, so they're getting a snapshot across the world. And like, they still my parents. There's like a sense of just like, they've known for a long time what I've been working on, so it's not like it surprised them what the story was. But there is a glint of recognition that like this is bigger than we expected, and I haven't been around them enough to know what they're making of it. Only my brother, who's here in New York, who I've spent some time with, and he gives me a bit of a hint, but not too much to the point where it frightens me. You know what I mean? He just
Mums are very difficult to please, I can tell you that.
Yeah.
But the other thing is, although you don't nail the person who wrote the letter, which was your mission from the very beginning, sometimes the story behind the story can be much more interesting. And without compromising anyone, do you think you know now who wrote the letter?
I mean, I think any inquiry about who wrote the letter should just look at the statements that have been made about it for a while. Even the Peter Clark report, the investigative document which the counter-terror chief put together on behalf of the Department for Education, recognizes that the likely author of the Trojan Horse letter came from this dispute at this primary school in Birmingham. An independent judge who sat to preside over that dispute, this employment dispute that kicked off at this primary school, accepted that the Trojan Horse letter, the author of it, has likely got something to do with this dispute. It's not quite the broad, wide net that people imagine it is. It's a very specific scandal in a very specific primary school in Birmingham that whoever has approached this Trojan Horse story, whatever their motivations were, have had to accept that the letter likely came from this dispute at this school. So I feel like if our story just hammers that home and makes it more pointed in terms of the search for the author, I feel there is hope to discover that, even though we couldn't prove it definitively. Some things just have to be accepted. The letter was a fake, and that has to be put to bed. No more inquiry that concerns the reality of the letter. It was called bogus in a briefing document that was sent to Michael Gove before it was ever made public. The Trojan Horse letter is a fake, and whoever came at it and looked at it accepted it likely came from this dispute at a primary school. So if that's where people who take the story forward focus on, I feel like we will discover the author.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I was just speaking to somebody earlier who was a school governor in Birmingham, and he lost his position, his reputation. His brother, who worked as a teacher, lost his job. This letter, which may have originated in Birmingham, just had a rippling effect throughout the Muslim community, and a lot of innocents were caught up in the flak.
No, I know. I remember while I was reporting, one of the evenings I was in East Birmingham, I came across a gentleman who lived in Bradford, was involved in schools in Bradford, and had, I think 2-3 weeks after the letter went public, had someone turn up at their door and start asking questions about them and their involvement with the Trojan Horse and this plot, again, that never existed. And yet reporters were chasing Muslims involved in schools up and down the country, you know. It's incredible. It's really is bizarre to think about when you step back and stare at what the reality of the situation was.
Well, thank you so much for giving us your time today. I know you're in New York. I hope you don't stay there. I do hope that you come back and share your skills with other budding and aspiring young journalists. And it's great to see Muslims in action, and hopefully your hard work will inspire and empower Muslims across the UK, not just to sit back and think this is the life and accept bad things that have been happening around the Muslim community. But I'm looking forward to your next investigation.
I mean, yeah, it's too soon to speak about the next one. Let's let this one settle, and our thoughts will turn to that maybe at some point later in the year. But thank you. I appreciate that. I hope it is the moment that you speak to. I'm not there myself to experience what's happening in Britain, but I trust your word that people are responding to the series, and, you know, inshallah, we'll make the most of it.
Inshallah. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Yvonne. Thank you. Good speaking to you. Take care.
Now that this wicked affair has been exposed as an evil plot designed to harm and undermine Britain's Muslims, what is the view like from the other side of the world? Tabor Khan, founder of the Khadija Leadership Network based in New Zealand, has followed events closely, and she talks about the seismic repercussions for all Muslim communities?
People who have migrated here, not all of us, we have Maori Muslims, but we've migrated here and we understand what it feels like to be a threat all the time because of influences of foreign policy.
Well, from gloomy, windswept Britain to the sunny shores of New Zealand, Taiba Khan, salam alaikum and welcome. Now, then you have heard the Trojan Horse podcast. What was your initial reaction to it?
Yeah, look, I was angry, I was heartbroken. So much of what was happening at the time made sense. And to be honest, a little bit destroyed as a result of how things have unfolded and how I can relate to them all the way here in Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Are there lessons for the New Zealand Muslim community to learn from this?
Absolutely. I think everything that's happening in the UK at present or has happened in terms of counterterrorism policies is a massive lesson for us to learn. As you know, we had the Christchurch terror attacks in 2019. For a lot of New Zealanders, it was a wake-up call because we didn't believe something like that could happen here. But for the Muslim community, it was only a matter of time. You know, we are people who have migrated here. Not all of us, we have Maori Muslims, but we've migrated here and we understand what it feels like to be a threat all the time because of influences of foreign policy. So for some of us, it was literally a matter of time before something like this was going to happen. So what's happening in the UK is completely relevant to us, you know, and we need to learn from your experiences so that we can change ours.
I mean, we've discovered that one of the government ministers, Michael Gove, knew that the letter was a hoax, that the plot was a hoax, and yet he carried on with his mission to drive forward policies which went on to shape counter-terrorism policies in Britain and you know, the awful discredited PREVENT scheme, which was used as a very blunt tool to bash up Muslims and persecute the community. Do you really think things like that could happen in New Zealand?
Oh, look, they've already happened in New Zealand, Sister Yvonne. We have the jihadi bride incident that happened here, where, you know, politicians were claiming that we had jihadi brides amongst us. And community leaders were saying, well, where's the proof? Give us the proof. And in fact, we're willing to work with our own community to make sure that we do not have our young people going offshore fighting wars that are not theirs to fight. And so it turned out that actually none of it was true for us, not for the New Zealand context. So look, we can't say that won't happen here because it has already happened here. Probably not at the scale in the UK, but definitely on a smaller scale.
But at least your community leaders stood up and said, hold on, this is not true. Unfortunately, quite a few community leaders in the UK appeared to agree that, yes, there is a plot of Muslim extremists that are going to infiltrate our schools. So, I mean, they're quite silent and shamefaced since this revelation from the podcast has come out. And it is a watershed moment in Britain. But I'm just wondering, you know, is it being discussed in New Zealand at all? Has it reached that far?
Look, it absolutely has reached that far, probably not being discussed at the scale that we should be discussing it at. Particularly, it's because of its intersectionality with how PREVENT just, you know, prolifically expanded right after the Trojan Horse, you know, story broke out. But look, what I would want to cover, Sister Yvonne, is that the one thing that Trojan Horse, this podcast, really struck a chord for me, you know, was around the shame that you can feel that there are possibly members of your own community that could be involved and complicit in these situations. And it'll be unwise of me to say that that's not the case for us here. I think that's the case for every community everywhere. Our reality, though, is slightly different because we are smaller. You know, there's only about 60,000 of us here, so it's easier to manage the dynamics of how we come together and how we unite as a force. So yeah, look, it has reached here. You know, there are journalists who are talking about it. There are academics who are talking about it, particularly those who are working in the counterterrorism space, activists who are really interested in how the story unfolded and what we could learn from it as a result of what's happening here.
Right. And what advice would you give Muslims living in the UK? You know, they feel really under pressure, but they're also very, very angry. There's a petition going round to try and force a parliamentary debate on the whole issue. The Muslim Council of Britain is now standing up and demanding a public inquiry. And of course, there are those who've had their lives totally wrecked by this hoax, who are seeking legal redress. Is there any encouraging words you can give to them?
Yeah, all I can say is, you know, if you want to participate, be better informed and don't follow half truths, follow the full truth. Don't follow a partial perspective. Try and figure out the whole perspective. That is how you will make sure you come out of it as a collective, as better informed, participate in democracy, participate in society, and actually make better decisions, not just for yourself, but for everyone else. It's the message I give to people here, and it's the message that I have for people in the UK.
Well, wise words, and I'm sure they'll travel well. As ever, it's been great to see you, Tiber, and thank you for your advice.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for this week's In Conversation with Yvonne Ridley. I hope you enjoyed it. Please tune in next week and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you. Bye.